Serafina's hands trembled as she adjusted the pale blue dress for the third time in as many minutes. The fabric felt wrong against her skin, too soft, too delicate, like something that belonged to a girl who hadn't spent the last 3 weeks dreading this exact moment. The mirror in the Moonstone Pack Community Center bathroom showed her the truth she'd been trying to ignore. White blonde hair that fell straight to her waist, so pale it looked silver under the fluorescent lights. Eyes the color of winter ice ringed with lashes so light they were almost invisible. Skin like fresh snow, unmarked, except for the faint blue veins visible at her wrists and throat. Beautiful, some people said. Cursed, whispered others. Serafina had stopped caring which one was true somewhere around her 16th birthday when she realized the albinism that made her different would always make her less desirable, less worthy, less likely to find a mate who could look past the genetic anomaly to see the woman underneath. But Devon had looked past it, or so she'd believed for the 3 months since their bond had snapped into place. 3 months of stolen glances across the pack dining hall. 3 months of his hand finding hers in the darkness of movie nights. 3 months of whispered promises that they would make it work, that he didn't care what anyone else thought, that she was perfect exactly as she was. 3 months of the most profound hope Serafina had ever allowed herself to feel. Tonight was supposed to be the official announcement. The full moon ceremony where Devon would claim her publicly as his chosen mate in front of the entire pack. Where their connection would be recognized and celebrated. Where Serafina would finally belong somewhere. The bathroom door swung open and her friend Melissa rushed in, dark curls wild around her face. Brown eyes wide with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." The trembling in Serafina's hands spread to her arms, her shoulders, her core. She knew that tone, that careful, gentle tone people used when they were about to destroy your world and wanted to pretend they were doing you a favor. "What is it?" Melissa's throat worked as she swallowed hard. "Devon's been meeting with the Silverstone Pack Alpha's daughter, Cassandra. She's been here all week for the trade negotiations, and I saw them together in the garden yesterday, and Sarah, they looked like mates," Serafina finished quietly. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "I'm so sorry. I thought you should know before tonight, before he makes it public. Before he rejects you in front of everyone," Melissa didn't say. But the words hung in the air between them anyway, heavy and inevitable. Serafina turned back to the mirror. The girl looking back at her didn't seem surprised. Somewhere deep down, she'd always known this was coming. Had always known that the genetic defect that made her different would eventually matter more than any connection the moon goddess had created. Pack politics always won. Advantageous alliances always trumped destined mates. Especially when one half of that pair was an Omega who looked like a ghost and earned $32,000 a year shelving books. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "I should go. The ceremony starts in 10 minutes. "Sarah, you don't have to go. You could leave, pack your things, and just go." But that was the coward's way. And whatever else Serafina Ashford was, whatever flaws and defects and abnormalities, marked her as less than she wasn't a coward. "I'll face it," she said. "I'll give him that much dignity." The Moonstone Pack main hall occupied an entire city block in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. From the outside, it looked like any other historic building in the area, all brick and tall windows and architectural details from the early 1900s. But inside, it was pure pack with high ceilings and exposed beams, and the kind of open space that could accommodate 300 wolves when everyone gathered for ceremonies. Tonight, everyone had gathered. Serafina felt their eyes on her the moment she stepped through the double doors. Pack members lined the walls, filled the folding chairs, arranged in neat rows, clustered in small groups, whispering behind carefully placed hands. The air smelled like pine and wet earth and the particular musk of too many shifters in one enclosed space. Someone had decorated with white flowers and silver ribbons for a wedding that was about to become a funeral. Devon stood at the front of the hall on the raised platform reserved for pack leadership. He wore a dark suit that made his black hair and brown eyes stand out in sharp relief, tall and strong and undeniably alpha in the way he held himself, shoulders back and chin lifted, and every line of his body radiating the confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. Next to him stood his father, the current Moonstone Pack Alpha, and next to his father stood a woman Serafina had never seen before. Tall where Serafina was small. Dark where Serafina was pale. Curves where Serafina had angles. Beautiful in the conventional way that opened doors and turned heads and made alpha wolves sit up and take notice. Cassandra Silverstone. The political alliance Devon had chosen over what the moon goddess herself had created. Serafina forced herself to walk down the center aisle, compelled her legs to obey despite feeling like water. Her head stayed high through sheer will, her gaze locked on Devon's face as she approached the platform. For just a moment, she saw something flicker across his expression. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But then his features smoothed into the blank politeness of a stranger, and she knew. This was really happening. He was really going to do this. Serafina, Devon's father said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. Thank you for joining us this evening. As if she'd had a choice. As if rejected mates were allowed to simply not show up to their own public humiliation. Devon stepped forward. The entire pack seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the back rows, Serafina heard a child start to cry before being quickly shushed. Before the moon goddess and these assembled witnesses, Devon began, his voice formal and cold, and nothing like the warm whispers he'd breathed against her skin in stolen moments. I make the following declaration. This was it, the point of no return. The moment that would define the rest of Serafina's life, however long or short that life turned out to be. She wanted to close her eyes, wanted to look away, wanted to be anywhere but here, standing in front of 300 people who were about to watch her shatter. But she kept her gaze steady, kept watching Devon's face, kept her spine straight and her hands still and her expression carefully, perfectly neutral. If he was going to destroy her, he was going to have to look at her while he did it. I, Devon Blackwood, future alpha of the Moonstone Pack, officially rejects Serafina Ashford as my destined mate. The words hit like physical blows, like fists to the stomach, to the chest, to the throat. The connection between them, already strained by Devon's growing distance over the past week, began to fray. Serafina felt it unraveling like thread pulled from fabric, each fiber separating with a sharp sting that made her want to gasp. But she didn't gasp, didn't cry, didn't react at all except to lift her chin higher and wait for him to finish. Devon's jaw tightened. My reasons are as follows. Serafina Ashford is too weak to stand beside an alpha destined for pack leadership. Her genetic abnormalities represent a liability to our bloodline. Her omega status and lack of significant skills or connections make her unsuitable for the position of future Luna. In short, she is not strong enough, not healthy enough, not valuable enough to be my mate. Each word was a knife, each reason a fresh cut. But the worst part, the part that would haunt Serafina for years to come, was that Devon wasn't wrong. She was weak. She did have genetic abnormalities. She didn't have skills or connections or anything of value to offer an ambitious alpha, except a connection she hadn't asked for and couldn't control. The truth often hurt worse than lies. Furthermore, Devon continued, his gaze finally sliding away from hers to focus on some point above her head. I hereby banish Serafina Ashford from Moonstone Pack lands. She has 24 hours to collect her belongings and vacate pack housing. After that time, she will be considered a rogue and treated as such if found on our territory. Banishment, not just rejection, but complete expulsion from the only home she'd ever known. From the pack that had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7, from the community center job that had been boring but steady, from the small studio apartment that had been cramped but hers, Devon wanted her gone, completely, permanently, erased from his life as if she'd never existed. Do you accept this rejection, Serafina Ashford? Devon's father asked, his voice not unkind, but not sympathetic either. This was pack law. This was how things were done. Omega mates who weren't suitable could be rejected. It was rare but not unheard of. And once the rejection was accepted, the link could be severed completely. Serafina found her voice somewhere in the wreckage of her chest. I accept the rejection. 4 words. That's all it took. 4 simple words, and everything snapped, completely severing with a pain so intense that Serafina's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the platform, fingers digging into the wood hard enough to leave marks. The world tilted and spun. Her stomach heaved. Her lungs forgot how to pull in air. This was what rejection felt like dying without the mercy of actual death. When her vision finally cleared, Serafina became aware of the absolute silence in the hall. 300 wolves, and not a single one of them making a sound. All of them watching her, judging her, pitying her. Relieved probably that it wasn't them standing here broken and cast aside. She straightened slowly, released the platform, smoothed down her dress with hands that barely shook at all, considering. Is there anything else? She asked Devon quietly. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Your pack bank account will be closed within the hour. The pack will not provide references for future employment. All ties between you and Moonstone are permanently severed. Of course. Why simply reject and banish her when he could also ensure she had no money and no way to get a job? Why not twist the knife a little deeper? Serafina nodded once. Understood. Then she did what she'd promised herself she would do. She walked out of that hall with her head high and her back straight and not a single tear on her face. She walked past 300 witnesses who would spend the next week gossiping about the albino Omega who'd been publicly rejected and banished. She walked out into the cool Seattle night and kept walking away from the only home she'd ever known toward a future that was completely terrifyingly blank. She didn't cry until she was 6 blocks away, huddled in a bus shelter with the rain starting to fall and nowhere left to go. The next 3 days blurred together in a nightmare of logistics and survival that Serafina had never imagined she'd have to navigate. Day one was spent frantically packing what she could carry in a single duffel bag before the pack housing authorities came to lock her out. Clothes, toiletries, the few pieces of jewelry her mother had left her, the business degree from the University of Washington that she'd earned but never used because the pack had needed a librarian more than they'd needed another person with a bachelor's in business management. Everything else got left behind. The furniture that had come with the apartment, the books she'd collected over the years, the life she'd tried to build. The pack bank account closed at exactly midnight, just as Devin had promised. Serafina's last check from the community center had been deposited 3 days earlier. She withdrew every penny in cash before the account vanished. $473. That was all she had in the world. Day two involved sleeping on a bench in Green Lake Park because the cheapest motel she could find wanted $60 a night and she needed to make her money last as long as possible. She bought a $10 sleeping bag from a thrift store and huddled under a tree until park security ran her off at dawn. Then she walked through neighborhoods she'd never explored, walked past shops and restaurants where people went about their normal lives completely unaware that hers had just imploded. Walked until her feet ached and her legs trembled and she was too exhausted to think about how completely fucked she was. Day three was when the hunger set in. Real hunger, not just missed meals. The kind of hunger that made her dizzy and weak and desperate enough to dig through a dumpster behind a sandwich shop for anything edible. She found half a turkey club someone had thrown away and ate it sitting on the curb, trying not to think about how far she'd fallen in less than 72 hours. From promising mate to dumpster diving, from pack member to rogue, from woman with a future to woman with nothing. That night she slept in an abandoned building near the waterfront, or tried to sleep. Mostly she lay on the concrete floor using her duffel bag as a pillow and stared at the ceiling and wondered how much longer she could survive like this. The money was disappearing faster than she'd expected. The sleeping bag was thin and the March nights were cold and her body was starting to protest the lack of food and shelter in ways that scared her. She needed a job, needed it desperately. But without pack references, without a permanent address, without even a working phone now that her pack-sponsored plan had been canceled, finding legitimate employment seemed impossible. On the morning of day 4, Serafina woke to rain dripping through holes in the abandoned building's roof and made a decision. She couldn't keep doing this. Couldn't keep sleeping rough and eating garbage and pretending she had any kind of plan. She needed help, needed shelter and food and safety. She needed to swallow her pride and take whatever option presented itself, no matter how unpalatable. That's when she saw the poster taped to a telephone pole near the Pike Place Market. Simple black text on white paper, professional looking, despite its low-tech distribution method. Omega staff needed Crimson Moon Club room and board, included inquire within 412 First Avenue Pioneer Square. Serafina had heard whispers about the Crimson Moon Club. Every Omega in Seattle had heard the whispers. It was a private establishment, exclusive and expensive, where wealthy alphas went to indulge appetites that polite society pretended didn't exist. The kind of place where Omegas could earn good money if they were willing to trade their bodies for financial security. The kind of place Serafina had once sworn she would never be desperate enough to consider. But that was before the rejection, before the banishment, before 3 days of sleeping outside and eating trash and feeling her will to survive slowly erode under the weight of just how completely alone she was in the world. Room and board included. That's what the poster said. A place to sleep, food to eat, safety at least relative to sleeping in abandoned buildings. Serafina pulled the poster down and folded it carefully into her pocket. She would do whatever it took to survive, even if that meant selling the last thing she had left to sell. Pioneer Square was one of Seattle's oldest neighborhoods, full of historic buildings that had been renovated into trendy shops and expensive restaurants. The Crimson Moon Club occupied a 5-story structure that looked like it had been built in the late 1800s, all Gothic Revival architecture, with pointed arches and decorative stonework and windows that seemed to watch the street like dark eyes. Serafina stood across the street for 10 minutes trying to gather her courage. The building looked expensive, intimidating, like the kind of place that wouldn't want someone who looked like her, all pale skin and desperate eyes and clothes that hadn't been washed in 3 days. But the alternative was another night in that abandoned building, another day of hunger gnawing at her stomach, another slow slide toward complete destitution. She crossed the street and pushed through the heavy wooden doors before she could change her mind. The interior was nothing like she'd expected. Instead of the tawdry red velvet and dim lighting, she'd imagined the Crimson Moon Club's entrance looked like an upscale restaurant, soft lighting from antique fixtures, dark wood paneling, a hostess stand made of polished mahogany, where an impeccably dressed woman with sharp features and sharper eyes looked up as Serafina approached. "We're not open yet," the woman said, her tone polite but dismissive. "Service begins at 6. "I'm not here for service," Serafina said, pulling out the crumpled poster. "I saw this about Omega staff positions." The woman's expression changed, not softening exactly, but shifting into something more assessing, more interested. She took in Serafina's appearance with one sweeping glance that felt like being examined under a microscope. "What's your name, Serafina?" "Serafina Ashford." "I don't have one." One perfectly sculpted eyebrow lifted. "Rogue, recently independent," Serafina said, choosing her words carefully. "As of 3 days ago." Understanding flickered across the woman's face. "Rejected." There was no point lying. The broken connection left a mark that anyone with experience could recognize. A certain hollowness around the eyes. A fragility that hadn't been there before. "Yes." The woman nodded slowly, then reached for the phone on her desk. "Wait here." She spoke quietly into the receiver, words too low for Serafina to hear. Then she hung up and gestured to a set of stairs leading up. "5th floor, suite 501. Madame Viviane will see you now." Serafina climbed the stairs on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. Each floor seemed dedicated to a different purpose. Ground floor for the restaurant. Second and third floors with doors leading to what looked like club spaces. Fourth floor marked VIP in elegant script. And fifth floor private suites where a woman who could only be Madame Vivian waited in an open doorway. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with presence. 50, maybe older, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and dark eyes that missed nothing. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Serafina had earned in 6 months at the community center. "Come in," Madame Vivian said. Her voice was smooth-cultured, with just a hint of something European in her accent. French, perhaps. The suite was exactly what Serafina had imagined a high-end clubroom would look like. Enormous bed with silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, furniture that belonged in a luxury hotel, and underneath it all, the faint scent of sex and expensive cologne. "Sit," Madame Vivian gestured to an antique chair. Serafina sat. "Tell me your situation. All of it. I don't employ Omegas who lie to me." So Serafina told her about Devon and the rejection, about the banishment and the lost job and the 3 days of sleeping rough, about the $473 that was now down to $47 because she'd needed to eat something besides trash, about having a business degree she'd never used and zero prospects for legitimate employment without PAC references. Madame Vivian listened without interrupting. When Serafina finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're new," she finally said. "Virgin?" Serafina's face burned. "Yes." "Good. That increases your value significantly." Madame Vivian stood and walked to the window looking out over the water. "Here's what I can offer. We have clients who specifically requested an Omega with your profile. Young, inexperienced, desperate enough to be compliant. They're willing to pay $10,000 for one night. $10,000. More money than Serafina had ever seen in her life. Enough to get an apartment, buy decent clothes, maybe even last long enough to find real work. What would I have to do? Whatever they ask, within reason. We don't allow serious harm or permanent marking without consent. But everything else is negotiable. They're paying for submission, for obedience, for the fantasy of complete control over a willing Omega." Serafina's stomach twisted. This was it. The moment where she either sold herself or walked back out onto the streets to continue slowly dying of exposure and starvation. "Room and board?" she said quietly. The poster said room and board was included. "For staff, yes. You'd have a room on the 3rd floor. Nothing like this," Madame Vivian gestured around the suite, "but clean and safe and yours. Meals provided, basic salary beyond what clients pay you directly. And if I refuse a client, that depends. High-value clients like tonight's have special arrangements, but generally speaking, you can refuse anyone for any reason. However, Madame Vivian turned to face her fully. If you refuse too often, you won't last long here. We provide value to our clients. That's how this works. It was honest, at least. Brutally so, but honesty was better than pretty lies. What time, Serafina heard herself ask. 8 o'clock tonight. These particular clients prefer late evening appointments. Madame Vivian walked to a dresser and pulled out a garment bag. You'll wear this. Shower in the bathroom through there. Make yourself presentable. When they arrive, you'll be waiting on your knees beside the bed. Eyes down. You don't speak unless spoken to. You obey every command. Do you understand? Serafina's hands were shaking again. Her whole body was shaking. But she nodded. I understand. Good. Madame Vivian moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. These clients have a reputation for being intense, but they're not cruel. They'll push boundaries, but they won't break them. If at any point you genuinely need them to stop, use the word red. They'll stop immediately. No questions. A safe word. At least there was that. Thank you, Serafina whispered. After Madame Vivian left, Serafina sat in that expensive chair for a long time, staring at the garment bag and trying to process what she'd just agreed to. In a few hours, she would give her virginity to strangers, would let them use her body in whatever ways they wanted, would trade the last piece of herself that still felt like hers for money and shelter and the chance to survive another day. Devon had been right about one thing. She was weak. Too weak to fight her way out of this situation through legitimate means. Too weak to hold on to her dignity when survival demanded sacrifice. Too weak to be anything other than exactly what she'd become. A desperate Omega selling herself on because she had nothing left. The shower was hot, and the water pressure was good, and the soap smelled like lavender. Serafina stood under the spray until her skin turned pink, washing away 3 days of grime and fear and failure. The dress in the garment bag was simple. Pale blue silk that matched her eyes, sleeveless, hitting just above her knees. No underwear. They wanted easy access. She dried her hair and left it loose, falling in a pale curtain down her back. No makeup. She didn't have any, and suspected they wanted her looking natural anyway. Young and innocent and untouched. At 7:45, Serafina positioned herself beside the bed, kneeling on the plush carpet with her gaze down and her hands folded in her lap. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat and her wrists behind her eyes. This was happening, really happening. In 15 minutes, strangers would walk through that door and claim her body in ways she'd once imagined would be reserved for a loving mate. For Devon, back when she'd still believed he wanted her. The severed connection ached in her chest, if phantom pain, from something that no longer existed. She wondered if it would always hurt like this, if she would spend the rest of her life feeling the absence of something she'd only had for 3 months. 8 o'clock came and went. 8:05. 8:10. Maybe they weren't coming. Maybe they'd changed their minds. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets. 2 people at least. The door opened and closed. Locked. The sound of that lock sliding home felt like a prison door closing. Eyes down, a voice said, deep and smooth and carrying the kind of command that made her Omega nature want to obey automatically. Don't look up until we tell you to. Serafina kept her gaze locked on the carpet. Watched 2 pairs of expensive dress shoes cross into her field of vision. Italian leather, perfectly polished. The kind of shoes that cost more than her entire wardrobe used to. Beautiful, a second voice said. Different from the first, but somehow similar. Same timbre, same cadence. Exactly what we requested. Virgin, terrified, desperate. Perfect. Hands touched her hair, gentle fingers combing through the pale strands, testing the texture. She forced herself not to flinch. What's your name? The first voice asked. Serafina. Look at me, Serafina. She raised her gaze slowly and felt her breath catch. There were 2 of them, identical in every way that mattered. Tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair and sharp features. Their eyes gleamed with an inner light even in the soft, sweet lighting. They wore matching dark suits that had definitely been tailored specifically for their builds. Everything about them screamed power and wealth and the kind of dangerous confidence that came from being apex predators. But it was their eyes that held her frozen. Pewter irises with an unnatural gleam, glowing faintly with the kind of inner light that marked ancient bloodlines. Strong alphas, the kind who could have any Omega they wanted. So why had they paid $10,000 for a desperate rogue with nothing to offer? The one who'd spoken first knelt in front of her, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she could see the subtle differences between them. This one had a small scar through his left eyebrow. His twin had a slightly sharper jawline. "I'm Kane," he said softly. "That's Ryder. We own this establishment." Serafina's mind reeled. These weren't just wealthy clients, they owned the Crimson Moon Club. They were the ones Madame Vivian answered to. "We don't usually participate in the activities here," Ryder added, moving to kneel on her other side. "We built this place, but we've never actually used the services. Until tonight." Why was he telling her this? Why did it matter? Kane's hand came up to cup her face thumb, brushing over her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. "Tell me, Serafina, do you know what it feels like when a true connection first forms?" Her throat closed. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. "I'll tell you," Kane continued, his metallic gaze locked on hers. "It feels like lightning, like everything inside you suddenly snapping into alignment with another person. Like finding something you didn't know you were missing." No, this wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. "We felt it the moment you walked into our club 4 hours ago," Ryder said quietly. "Felt you like a punch to the chest, our mate, our Omega. Standing at the hostess desk, looking lost and broken, and so fucking desperate, it made us want to kill whoever did this to you." Serafina's eyes burned. "That's not funny." "It's not a joke," Kane said. His thumb caught a tear before it could fall. "You're ours, Serafina. You were always meant to be ours. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly her whole body ached with the need, but she'd believed Devon too. Had trusted that their link meant something. Had let herself hope, only to have that hope destroyed in the most public, humiliating way possible. "You're lying," she whispered. "You're just saying what I want to hear to make me compliant. Madame Vivian said you liked fantasy, and this is just another." Ryder's hand found hers, lifting it to press against his chest, against his heart. Feel that his heart was racing, pounding against his ribs just as fast as hers was pounding against her own. "That's real," he said. "What's between us is real. We're not lying to you, Omega. We're not playing games. You belong to us now, and we're going to spend the rest of the night proving it." Serafina stared at the two identical faces surrounding her, her mind struggling to process what they were claiming. A true connection. Real. Hers. After Devon had rejected her in front of 300 witnesses. After 3 days of sleeping in abandoned buildings and eating from dumpsters. After she'd walked into this club, prepared to sell herself to strangers just to survive another week. The universe couldn't be that cruel and that kind in the same breath. "I don't understand," she whispered. Her hand was still pressed against Ryder's chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath expensive fabric and warm skin. "Why would you set this up? Why not just tell me when I arrived?" Kane's thumb traced her cheekbone again, the touch almost reverent. "Because you walked into our club, desperate and vulnerable. If we'd simply told you we were your mates, would you have believed us? Or would you have thought we were just alpha wolves taking advantage of a rogue Omega with nowhere else to go?" He was right. She wouldn't have believed them. Would have assumed it was a cruel joke or a manipulation tactic. "We needed to control the situation," Ryder added, his voice low. "The moment we felt your presence, we had Vivian lock down the fourth-floor VIP rooms. No other clients allowed up here tonight. Because if any other alpha had scented you, had touched you." His jaw clenched hard enough that Serafina could see the muscle jump. "We would have killed them." The absolute certainty in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear exactly, something more complicated. Something that felt dangerously like hope trying to resurrect itself from the ashes Devon had left behind. "So this whole thing," Serafina said slowly, trying to understand, "the $10,000, Vivian's instructions waiting here on my knees. It was all staged." "The money is real," Kane said. "It's yours regardless of what happens tonight. Consider it compensation for the 3 days of hell you've endured. As for the rest..." His alpha gaze darkened with something that made heat pool low in Serafina's belly. "We wanted you exactly like this. In our space-wearing silk we provided waiting for us. But not because you're for sale, Serafina, because you're ours to claim." "We know you were rejected 4 days ago," Ryder said quietly. "We can see the broken link in your eyes. We know you're damaged and scared and probably don't trust anything an alpha tells you right now. But we're going to prove that we're different, that this is different, that you never have to be desperate or afraid again." Serafina wanted to believe them. God, she wanted to believe them so badly it hurt worse than the rejection had. But believing meant risking, meant opening herself up to the possibility of being destroyed all over again. "How?" she asked. "How can I trust this? Kane moved closer, his hand sliding from her face to the back of her neck. The touch sent electricity racing down her spine, made her breath catch in her throat. Because true connections don't lie. Your Omega nature recognizes us even if your mind is still fighting it. You can feel the pull, can't you? The need to submit, to surrender, to let us take care of you. She could. Despite everything, despite the fear and the doubt and the trauma still raw from Devon's rejection, her body knew these alphas. Recognized them on some primal level that had nothing to do with logic or trust or conscious choice. Yes, she admitted in a whisper. Then let us show you, Ryder said. His hand found her other hip. Both twins now touching her, their combined presence overwhelming in the best and worst ways. Let us claim what's ours. Let us prove that the moon goddess didn't make a mistake this time. This time, as if her previous link had been the error and this was the correction. As if everything that had happened with Devon was just the universe's way of leading her here, to this moment, to these alphas. Serafina's hands were shaking, her whole body was shaking, but she nodded. Okay. The word had barely left her lips before Kane's mouth was on hers. The kiss was nothing like she'd expected, not rough or demanding or taking. Instead, it was careful, almost gentle, like he was trying to memorize the shape of her lips, the taste of her mouth, the soft sounds she made when his tongue swept past her teeth. He tasted like expensive whiskey, and something darker, richer, uniquely him. The hand on her neck tightened just enough to hold her in place, to remind her who was in control, but not enough to hurt. Never enough to hurt. When he finally pulled back, Serafina was breathless and flushed, and acutely aware of Ryder's presence at her other side, his hand still gripping her hip, his pewter gaze tracking every reaction. My turn, Ryder said, and then his mouth was replacing his brother's. Where Kane had been controlled and methodical, Ryder was heat and hunger barely restrained. He kissed like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. Deep and thorough and consuming. His hand slid from her hip to the small of her back, pressing her closer, eliminating the space between their bodies until Serafina could feel the hard planes of his chest against her breasts through the thin silk dress. She heard herself whimper into his mouth, heard the needy, desperate sound, and felt her face burn with embarrassment even as her body arched into the touch. When Ryder released her, both twins were breathing hard. Those gleaming eyes brighter now, pupils dilated with desire that was impossible to fake. Stand up, Kane commanded softly. Serafina's legs trembled, but she obeyed, rising from her kneeling position, with both alphas immediately flanking her. She felt small between them, delicate, surrounded by strength and heat, and the overwhelming presence of two apex predators who wanted her. Turn around, Ryder said. She turned, presenting her back to them. Felt Kane's fingers find the zipper of the silk dress, sliding it down with agonizing slowness. The fabric whispered as it fell, pooling at her feet in a puddle of pale blue that left her completely naked. For a long moment, neither twin moved. Serafina stood frozen, exposed, feeling their attention track over every inch of her skin. The pale white expanse of it, the blue veins visible at her wrists and throat, the small breasts and narrow hips, and the physical evidence of the genetic abnormality that had made Devon reject her as unsuitable. Fucking perfect, Ryder breathed. Serafina's throat tightened. You don't have to lie. We're not. Kane's hand settled on her shoulders, warm and steady and grounding. You're beautiful, Serafina. Every inch of you. The pale skin, the silver hair, the way your body responds to our touch. You're perfect because you're ours. Because the moon goddess made you specifically for us. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Refused to be that broken Omega crying at the first kind words after days of hell. Look at me, Ryder said, moving to stand in front of her, while Kane remained behind. I want to see your face when I touch you for the first time. His hands came up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Serafina didn't pull away. Couldn't pull away. Her Omega nature and her desperate heart, and some part of her that still wanted to believe in second chances, kept her rooted in place. Ryder's palms settled on her ribcage just below her breasts. His hands were large enough to span most of her torso, rough with calluses that suggested he worked with them despite his obvious wealth. The touch sent fire racing through her nervous system, made her gasp and arch into the contact before she could stop herself. So responsive, he murmured, thumbs brushing the underside of her breast. Has anyone ever touched you here, Omega? No, Serafina managed. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Breathy and desperate, and nothing like the careful librarian tone she'd cultivated over years of trying to make herself small and unthreatening. Good. Ryder's thumb swept higher, brushing over sensitive peaks that tightened instantly under his attention. These belong to us now. Every inch of you belongs to us. Behind her, Kane's hands slid from her shoulders, down her arms, then around to her stomach, pulling her back against his chest. She could feel the hard length of him pressing against her lower back through his suit pants, could feel the evidence of his desire in the barely restrained control he was exercising. "May I touch you here?" Kane's hand settled low on her belly, fingers splayed possessively, asking permission even though his tone made it clear what his preference was. "Yes," Serafina whispered. His hand slid lower, cupped her through the neat triangle of pale hair between her thighs. Found the evidence of her body's betrayal, the slickness that had been building since the first kiss, since the moment she'd felt their connection snap into place, even though her mind had been too traumatized to recognize it. "Fuck," Kane breathed against her ear. "You're already so wet for us. Can you feel what you do to us, Omega? How much we want you?" Serafina could only whimper as one of his fingers pressed deeper, parting her folds, finding the bundle of nerves that made her knees nearly buckle. She would have fallen if Ryder hadn't been there, his hands still on her breasts, his body a solid wall keeping her upright. "We're going to make you come," Ryder said, his voice rough with desire. "Right here, standing between us. We want to watch you fall apart before we ever take you to that bed." It wasn't a request, it was a statement of fact, a promise of what was about to happen, regardless of whether Serafina thought she could survive it. Kane's fingers circled that sensitive pearl with maddening precision, while his other hand held her hip, keeping her steady. Ryder's mouth found her throat lips and teeth working the sensitive skin, while his hands continued their torment of her breasts, rolling and plucking and sending jolts of pleasure straight to her core. The sensations were overwhelming, too much and not enough at the same time. Serafina heard herself making sounds she'd never made before, desperate keening noises that should have embarrassed her, but only seemed to encourage the twins. "That's it," Kane murmured. "Don't hold back. Let us hear you. Let us know what we're doing to you." His finger pressed inside her entrance, just barely testing the resistance. Serafina was tight virgin, tight, and even that small intrusion made her gasp. But it didn't hurt. Instead, it sent pleasure spiraling through her belly, made her hips rock forward, seeking more. "Please," she heard herself beg. "Please, I need—" "We know what you need," Ryder said against her throat. His teeth scraped her pulse point, not quite breaking skin, but hard enough to send a fresh wave of arousal flooding through her. "Come for us, Serafina. Right now. Let us feel you fall apart." Kane's thumb pressed hard on her clit while his finger pushed deeper, and that combination of sensations shattered something inside her. The orgasm hit like a physical blow, ripping through her body with an intensity that made her scream. Her legs gave out completely so that only their hands kept her upright. The world whited out for several endless seconds, while pleasure crashed over her in waves. When she finally came back to herself, she was trembling violently, tears streaming down her face. Both alphas were murmuring soft reassurances, hands gentling from demanding to soothing, supporting her weight between them. "Beautiful," Kane said softly. "So fucking beautiful when you come." "And that was just the beginning," Ryder added, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We haven't even gotten you to the bed yet." Serafina's laugh came out shaky and disbelieving. I can't do that again. It's too much." "You can," Kane assured her. "And you will, multiple times tonight, because we're going to claim every inch of you, Serafina. Going to make sure your body know exactly who it belongs to." He lifted her, easily cradling her against his chest as he carried her the few steps to the massive bed. The silk sheets were cool against her overheated skin as he laid her down, carefully arranging her in the center like something precious. Both twins stood at the foot of the bed, their alpha gazes tracking over her naked form. Then, moving in perfect synchronization, they began removing their own clothes. Serafina watched through heavy-lidded eyes as expensive suits were discarded, watched as acres of tanned skin and defined muscle were revealed. They were identical even without clothes, both carrying the kind of physiques that came from dedicated training rather than just genetics. Broad shoulders tapering to narrow hips, defined abs and powerful thighs. And between those thighs, impressive lengths that made Serafina's eyes widen and her thighs clench together instinctively. "Don't be afraid," Ryder said, catching her reaction. "We'll make sure you're ready. Make sure it's good for you." "I'm virgin," Serafina blurted out, then felt her face flame. "I mean, I know you probably already knew that, but I just wanted to say that I don't know what I'm doing and—" "Shh." Kane climbed onto the bed, settling beside her, his hand finding her face again in that gesture she was already beginning to associate with him. We know, and we're going to take care of you. Going to make your first time everything it should be. Everything Devin would have made it if he hadn't been a blind fucking fool, Ryder added, positioning himself on her other side. But his loss is our gain, and we're going to worship every inch of you the way you deserve. They moved together with the kind of coordination that suggested they'd done this before. Not with an Omega Serafina realized. They'd said they'd never use the club services, but they'd clearly shared lovers before her. The thought should have bothered her, but instead it was oddly comforting. They knew what they were doing, knew how to work together, wouldn't hurt her through inexperience or lack of communication. Kane's mouth found hers again, while Ryder's lips traced a burning path down her throat between her breasts over her ribs. Lower and lower until he was settled between her thighs, breath hot against her most intimate places. "May I taste you?" Ryder asked, his voice rough with need. Serafina's brain had stopped functioning somewhere around the moment they'd started removing their clothes. She could only nod. The first touch of Ryder's tongue made her cry out into Kane's mouth. Her hips jerked and her hands fisted in the silk sheets. The sensation was foreign and overwhelming, and so intensely pleasurable that she couldn't process it. Kane swallowed her moans, his hands roaming over her body, learning every curve and hollow, finding the places that made her gasp and returning to them again and again. His mouth moved from her lips to her jaw, down the column of her throat, finding the place where Devin's claiming bite should have been if he hadn't rejected her. "We're going to mark you here," Kane murmured against that sensitive skin. "Going to claim you properly. But not yet. Not until you're ready. Not until you understand that this is forever." Between her thighs, Ryder was driving her steadily toward another edge, his tongue and lips and the scrape of teeth working in concert to unravel every defense she'd tried to maintain. When he added fingers pressing inside her virgin channel with careful precision, Serafina felt the orgasm building again. "I can't," she gasped. "It's too soon, You can," Kane commanded. "Come for us again, Serafina. Show us how good we make you feel." The combination of his voice and Ryder's mouth and those careful fingers was too much. Serafina shattered again, her back arching off the bed, a scream tearing from her throat. The pleasure seemed to go on forever, wave after wave crashing through her until she was sobbing with the intensity of it. When she could finally breathe again, Ryder was moving back up her body, his face wet with her arousal, his metallic eyes almost completely black with desire. "I want to be the first inside you," he said, his voice barely above a growl. "Want to feel you come apart around me. But only if you're ready, only if you want this." Serafina looked between them. At Kane's careful control barely masking desperate need. At Ryder's hunger tempered by genuine concern for her comfort. At two alpha males who could have simply taken what they wanted, but were instead asking permission, offering choices, treating her like something precious rather than disposable. Nothing like Devin. Nothing like the alpha who'd rejected her for being too weak. "I want this," she said clearly. "I want you. Both of you. Please." Ryder positioned himself between her thighs while Kane moved to her head, threading his fingers through her hair, holding her gently in place. She felt Ryder's length pressing against her entrance, hot and hard and impossibly large. "This is going to hurt," Ryder warned, his jaw clenched with the effort of holding back. "I'm sorry, I'll go as slow as I can, but there's no way to make it painless." "I know," Serafina whispered. "I'm ready." He pushed forward slowly, carefully, giving her body time to adjust to the invasion. But careful didn't mean painless. The burning stretch as he entered her made Serafina cry out, made tears spring to her eyes, made her hands clutch at Kane's arms desperately. "Breathe," Kane coached gently, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Just breathe through it. The pain will pass." Ryder held completely still once he was fully seated inside her. His entire body was trembling with the effort of restraint, sweat beading on his forehead, every muscle locked tight. But he didn't move, didn't thrust, just waited while Serafina's body adjusted to his size. Slowly, the sharp pain faded to an ache. The ache faded to a strange fullness. The fullness became something else entirely. Something that made her hips shift experimentally, made a small sound of need escape her throat. "Okay," Ryder managed through gritted teeth. "Okay," Serafina confirmed. "You can move." He started with shallow thrusts, barely pulling out before pressing back in, testing her responses, gauging her comfort level. Above her, Kane's hands continued their soothing path over her hair, her face, her shoulders, grounding her, reminding her she was safe even in this vulnerable position. Gradually, the thrust became deeper, longer. Ryder's control was still impressive, but Serafina could feel it fraying at the edges, could see the way his alpha eyes had gone completely dark, could hear the growl building in his chest. You feel so fucking perfect, he groaned. So tight and hot and made for me. Made for us. His hand found her clit again, circling with the same precision Kane had used earlier. The combination of sensations, the fullness and the friction in the targeted attention pushed Serafina toward yet another peak. This one built slower, but felt bigger. Felt like it might actually break her apart. I'm going to come inside you, Ryder said, his thrust becoming erratic. Going to fill you up, mark you from the inside. Are you ready? Serafina could only nod, too far gone to form words. The orgasm hit her like a tidal wave, dragging her under, drowning her in sensation. She felt Ryder's release follow hers, felt the warmth flooding her, felt his teeth sink into her shoulder. Not the throat, not the permanent claiming mark, but a possessive bite that would fade but leave no doubt she'd been thoroughly claimed. The connection blazed to life. Not complete, not yet, but strong enough that Serafina could suddenly feel Ryder's emotions flooding through their link. His satisfaction, his possessiveness, his overwhelming love for someone he'd just met but had been waiting for his entire life. When he finally withdrew, Serafina lay boneless and shaking. Surely that was it. Surely she couldn't survive anymore. But Kane was already moving into position between her thighs, already looking down at her with those pewter eyes that promised he wasn't done. Not even close. My turn, he said softly. And then Omega, we're going to do this all over again until you understand in your bones that you belong to us, until the memory of any other Alpha is completely erased, until you're so thoroughly claimed that no one will ever question who you belong to. Serafina's last coherent thought before Kane pushed inside her already sensitized body was that she'd walked into the Crimson Moon Club expecting to sell herself to survive. Instead, she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found home. Serafina woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the unfamiliar sensation of being warm. Genuinely completely warm for the first time in 4 days. The silk sheets wrapped around her body felt like heaven against skin that was deliciously sore in places she'd never been sore before. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, eyes closed, afraid that opening them would shatter whatever dream this was, because it had to be a dream. The abandoned building, the hunger, the desperation, those were real. The expensive suite, and the soft bed and the lingering scent of 2 alpha males, this couldn't possibly be real. Then a hand settled on her hip, warm and possessive, and a voice rough with sleep murmured against her ear. Your anxiety is loud enough to wake the dead. Breathe love. Serafina's eyes flew open. She turned her head to find Kane propped on one elbow beside her, to metallic gaze, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. On her other side, Ryder was still asleep, one arm thrown across her waist, his face peaceful in a way that made him look younger than his 29 years. It's real, Kane said softly, as if reading her thoughts. Last night happened. What we share is real. You're ours now, Serafina. That's not going to change when the sun is up. Her throat tightened. I don't understand how this is my life now. 4 days ago, I had a home and a career and someone I thought wanted me. Now I have nothing except 2 alphas who would burn the world down to keep you safe, Kane interrupted. Except a connection that's stronger than anything you felt with that fool who rejected you. Except a future that doesn't involve sleeping in abandoned buildings or eating from dumpsters. The casual mention of her lowest moments made shame burn through Serafina's chest. She tried to turn away, but Kane's hand on her chin kept her facing him. Don't, he said firmly. Don't you dare feel ashamed for surviving. You did what you had to do. You've proven your resilience, stronger than that pack gave you credit for. I'm not strong, Serafina whispered. Strong people don't end up here. Strong people don't have to sell themselves just to eat. You didn't sell yourself. Ryder's voice was rough with sleep as he finally stirred his arm, tightening around her waist. You walked into our club looking for work. There's a difference. Is there? Serafina asked. I was prepared to let strangers use my body for money. That's pretty much the definition of a stop. Ryder moved suddenly, rolling her onto her back so he could look down at her, his body half covering hers. You were prepared to do whatever it took to survive. That's not weakness. That's the definition of strength. Most wolves in your situation would have given up, would have let themselves die rather than fight. But you fought. You're still fighting. Serafina felt tears burning behind her eyes. I don't feel like I'm fighting. I feel like I'm drowning, and you two are the only thing keeping me afloat. Then let us keep you afloat, Kane said. His hand found hers under the sheets, fingers lacing together. Let us take care of you while you figure out how to breathe again. That's what mates do. We support each other. The word mate still felt foreign in her mouth, still felt like something that belonged to other people, not to a rejected Omega with albinism and no prospects. As if sensing her doubt through their growing link, Ryder leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. I know you don't trust this yet. I know Devin destroyed something inside you that's going to take time to heal. But we have time, Serafina. We have all the time in the world to prove that we're not him, that we're not going to wake up one day and decide you're not good enough. How can you be so sure, Serafina asked. You barely know me. You felt something and claimed me, but you don't know anything about who I actually am. Then tell us, Kane said simply. We have all morning. Tell us about yourself, your family, your dreams, what you studied at university, everything. So Serafina did. Lying between them in that enormous bed, she told them about parents who died when she was 7, leaving her to be raised by a pack that never quite knew what to do with the albino Omega child. About loving books because they didn't care what she looked like. About earning a business degree because some part of her had still believed she could be more than what the pack expected. About Devin and the 3 months of hope, followed by the public destruction of everything she dared to want. The twins listened without interrupting. Kane's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, while Ryder's fingers drew patterns on her hip. Small touches that grounded her reminded her she wasn't alone in this story anymore. When she finally finished, her voice hoarse from talking, Ryder pressed another kiss to her temple. Thank you for trusting us with that. Now it's our turn, Kane said. Fair is fair. And they told her about growing up as twin alphas in a pack that had tried to force them to compete for dominance rather than work together. About a mother who'd been bonded to an alpha who slowly revealed himself to be cruel and controlling. About watching her fade over the years as the link she couldn't break slowly killed her spirit. She died when we were 19, Ryder said quietly. Just gave up one day, laid down and didn't wake up. Didn't. The pack doctor said it was heart failure, but we knew better. Her mate had broken her so completely that she didn't want to live anymore. We swore that day we'd never let an Omega suffer like that, Kane continued. We left the pack, came to Seattle, built our own empire. The Crimson Moon Club started as just a restaurant, then a bar. Then we realized there was a need for a safe place where Omegas could work if they chose to, where they'd be protected and paid fairly and never forced into anything they didn't want. Serafina absorbed this information slowly. So this club, it's not about exploitation. No, Ryder said firmly. Every Omega who works here does so by choice. They can refuse any client. They keep 70% of what they earn. We provide housing, healthcare, security. Some of our staff have been with us for years because they feel safer here than they ever did in their original packs. It reframed everything Serafina had assumed about the establishment, made her realize that Madame Vivian's careful questions and clear boundaries weren't just good business, they were genuine protection. Why do you two run a business like this if you've never... Serafina trailed off, feeling her face heat. Never participated, Kane finished with a slight smile. Because we were waiting. We always knew we'd share a mate. Twin alphas bonded as closely as we are almost always share. But we wanted it to be someone we genuinely connected with, not just bodies in the dark. And then you walked through our door, Ryder said, and we felt like we'd been hit by lightning. Everything made sense suddenly. Why we'd built this place. Why we'd waited. Because we were supposed to be here in this exact moment when you needed us most. Serafina wanted to believe in that kind of fate, wanted to trust that the universe had a plan. But Devin's rejection was still too fresh, the wound still too raw. I need time, she said quietly. I need time to trust that this is real, that you won't change your minds. Then take all the time you need, Kane said. But take it here with us, not out on the streets, not alone. We meant what we said last night, Ryder added. The money is yours. $10,000, no strings attached. But we'd like to offer you something else too. Serafina tensed. What? A job, Kane said. A real one. We need someone to manage the legitimate side of our business empire. The clubs, the restaurants, the real estate holdings. Our current operations manager is retiring, and we've been looking for someone with actual business education and fresh perspective. You want me to run your businesses? Serafina's voice came out higher than intended. I shelved books for a living. I don't know anything about managing an empire. You have a bachelor's degree in business management from UW, Ryder pointed out. That's more formal education than either of us have. We built this through trial and error and street smarts. But we're at a point where we need someone who actually knows theory, who can analyze profit and loss statements, who can think strategically about expansion. Why would you trust me with something that important? Serafina asked. You just met me. Because you're our mate, Kane said simply. Because we can feel your intelligence and determination through our connection. Because you survived 4 days of hell and still had the strength to walk into our club with your head high. That's the kind of resilience we need in a business partner. Business partner. Not just kept Omega, not just mate to be protected and provided for. An actual partner with responsibilities and authority. What would it pay? Serafina heard herself ask. 250,000 annually, Ryder said, plus performance bonuses, plus housing in our penthouse and full benefits. The number was so far beyond anything Serafina had imagined earning that her brain momentarily stopped functioning. $250,000, more than she'd make in 7 years at the community center, more money than she'd ever even seen in one place. That's too much, she protested weakly. That's market rate for someone managing a $500 million portfolio, Kane corrected. We're not doing you a favor, Serafina. We're making a sound business decision. Your degree, your work ethic, your outsider perspective, those are all valuable assets. I don't know if I can do this, Serafina whispered. What if I fail? What if I mess everything up? Then we'll figure it out together, Ryder said. But I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to exceed every expectation anyone ever had of you. The belief in his voice was almost painful to hear. No one had ever believed in her like this. Not her pack, not Devin, certainly not herself. Can I think about it? She asked. Take as much time as you need, Kane said. But while you're thinking, let us feed you. Actual food, not dumpster scraps. The mention of food made Serafina's stomach growl audibly. She couldn't remember the last real meal she'd eaten, days ago at least. Ryder grinned. I'll take that as a yes. Come on, Omega. Let's get you in the shower, and then we'll order breakfast. The next 3 days passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. The twins' penthouse was exactly as impressive as Kane had described, all floor-to-ceiling windows, with views of Elliott Bay and Mount Rainier modern furniture that probably cost more than Serafina had earned in her entire life, and a master bedroom with a bed large enough for 3 that made her blush every time she saw it. They gave her the office to use as her own space, filled the bookshelves with business texts and industry analyses, and set up a computer with access to all their financial records. Kane and Ryder went to their main office downtown each day, leaving Serafina to read and learn and try to wrap her mind around the scope of what she'd agreed to manage. The numbers were staggering. 12 clubs generating an average of $3 million each annually. 18 restaurants with profit margins ranging from razor-thin to excellent, depending on location and concept. Real estate portfolio worth over $200 million with rental income and appreciation. But Serafina also found inefficiencies. Clubs overstaffed during slow periods. Restaurants using suppliers who were overcharging. Properties sitting vacant when they could be generating income. Her business degree might have been gathering dust for 3 years, but the knowledge was still there, and her mind immediately started identifying problems and potential solutions. She filled 3 notebooks with observations and questions, started building spreadsheets, analyzing costs and revenue streams, lost herself in the work in a way she never had at the community center. This was what she'd gone to university for. This was what she'd dreamed of doing before the pack convinced her that ambition wasn't appropriate for an Omega. The evenings were different. Evenings were when the twins came home and the penthouse transformed from office to something more intimate. They'd cook dinner together, all 3 of them navigating the kitchen in a dance that became more synchronized each night. They'd talk about their days, the twins asking Serafina's opinion on business decisions, Serafina slowly learning to trust that her input actually mattered to them. And then there were the nights. The claiming that first evening had been intense and overwhelming, driven by connection urgency and 4 days of Serafina's trauma. But the nights that followed were different, slower, more exploratory. The twins learned her body with the same thorough attention they brought to everything, discovering what made her gasp, what made her moan, what made her come apart in their arms. Serafina learned them too, learned that Kane liked control but would surrender it if she asked, learned that Ryder's passionate intensity masked a surprisingly tender heart, learned that being with both of them simultaneously felt less like too much and more like exactly right, like she'd been made to fit between them. Their link strengthened each day. Serafina could feel their emotions now as clearly as her own. Kane's careful calculation and strategic thinking. Ryder's protective instincts and barely contained passion. And underneath, both a growing love that terrified her because she was starting to feel it too. On Sunday evening, the night before she was supposed to officially start work, Serafina sat at the dining table with her notebook spread out, trying to organize her thoughts into something coherent for the morning meeting Kane had scheduled. "You're overthinking," Ryder said, appearing behind her to massage her shoulders. "I want to make a good impression," Serafina protested. "Your senior staff is going to be skeptical about the boss's new Omega girlfriend taking over operations. I need to prove I actually know what I'm doing." "You do know what you're doing," Kane said from the kitchen where he was making tea. "And anyone who has a problem with you will answer to us. You're not just our mate, Serafina. You're our business partner. That means you have our full authority to make decisions and implement changes." The trust implicit in those words still amazed her. 10 days ago, she'd been rejected and banished. Now she had two alpha mates who were handing her control of their entire empire. "What if I mess everything up?" Serafina asked quietly. Ryder's hands stilled on her shoulders. He came around to kneel in front of her chair, taking her face in his hands. "Then we'll fix it together. But you're not going to mess up. I've been reading your notes, Serafina. The observations you've made, the inefficiencies you've identified. We should have caught those years ago. You've been here 3 days and you already see things we were too close to notice." "Ryder's right," Kane said, setting a cup of tea in front of her. "You're going to be brilliant tomorrow and every day after, because that's who you are. Not the weak Omega that Pac tried to convince you you were. The brilliant, capable woman we always knew you'd be." Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. "How do you two always know exactly what to say?" "Connection," they said in unison, then grinned at each other. She laughed through her tears, feeling something tight in her chest finally start to loosen. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she could be more than what she'd been told she was capable of. Maybe Devon rejecting her hadn't been the end of her story. Maybe it had just been the beginning. That night, wrapped between her mates in the enormous bed, Serafina allowed herself to hope for the first time since the rejection. Hope that this was real. Hope that she could build something meaningful. Hope that she'd finally found where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Staff skepticism, business decisions, the weight of responsibility. But tonight she was warm and safe and loved. And for now, that was enough. Monday morning arrived with the weight of expectation pressing down on Serafina's shoulders. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the navy blazer Kane had insisted she buy during their shopping trip yesterday. Professional. Authoritative. Nothing like the desperate Omega who'd walked into Crimson Moon Club 10 days ago. 10 days. That's all it had been since Devon's rejection. Since she'd slept in abandoned buildings and eaten from dumpsters. Since she'd believed her life was over. Now she was about to walk into a boardroom as vice president of operations for a $500 million empire. "You look perfect," Ryder said from the doorway, his mercury gaze tracking over her appreciatively. "Though I prefer you in nothing at all." Despite her nerves, Serafina felt heat bloom in her cheeks. "Not helpful right now." "Actually very helpful," Kane corrected, appearing beside his twin. "You need to remember you're not just our employee. You're our mate, our equal partner. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects us." The ride to Thornridge Tower in downtown Seattle passed too quickly. Serafina clutched her leather portfolio filled with the analysis she'd spent 3 days preparing and tried to ignore the way her stomach twisted with anxiety. The conference room on the 42nd floor was already full when they arrived. 14 people sat around an enormous mahogany table, conversation dying the moment the twins entered, with Serafina between them. She felt their eyes assessing her, judging, wondering what an unknown Omega was doing in their executive meeting. "Everyone," Kane's voice carried absolute authority. "This is Serafina Ashford, our new VP of Operations. She'll be overseeing all club restaurant and property management moving forward. Marcus will transition to advisory role over the next month." Marcus Reed sat at the far end of the table, 60 maybe older, with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that tracked over Serafina with something that looked uncomfortably like dismissal. "No offense to Ms. Ashford, but don't you think executive decisions should involve the board? We weren't consulted about this hire." "We don't need board approval for operational staffing," Ryder said coolly. "That's our prerogative as majority owners." "Still," another voice interjected. Serafina's eyes found the speaker. Late 50s, expensive suit, alpha confidence radiating from every pore. "It's unusual to bring in someone so inexperienced for such a critical role. What are Ms. Ashford's qualifications?" Victor Harlow. She recognized him from the brief Kane had given her. Board member, old money, traditional views about Omega capabilities. This was the test, right now. Either she proved herself or she'd spend every day fighting for basic respect. Serafina set her portfolio on the table and opened it with steady hands. I have a bachelor's in business management from University of Washington. More importantly, I spent the last 3 days analyzing your operations. May I? She didn't wait for permission. Pulled out the first spreadsheet and began distributing copies around the table. Your 12 clubs generate approximately 36 million annually. Impressive. But you're overstaffed during off-peak hours by an average of 30%. That's roughly 1.2 million in unnecessary labor costs per year. The room had gone completely silent. Every eye was on her now. Your restaurant supplier contracts haven't been renegotiated in 4 years. Market prices for produce and protein have dropped 15% since 2020. You're overpaying by approximately 800,000 annually. She pulled out another sheet. Your real estate portfolio has 6 properties sitting vacant. Combined potential rental income, 1.5 million per year, you're leaving on the table. That's over 3 million in inefficiencies I identified in 72 hours. Imagine what I can find with full access and more time. The silence stretched. Then Marcus Reed leaned back in his chair, something like respect flickering across his weathered face. Well, that's certainly thorough. It's numbers on paper, Victor said dismissively. Theory doesn't always translate to practice. No offense, Ms. Ashford, but managing real operations requires experience you simply don't have. Then let me gain it, Serafina said, meeting his gaze directly. Give me 90 days. If I can't demonstrate measurable improvement, I'll step down. But if I can save this company $3 million in 3 months, you'll respect my position. Deal? Victor's eyes narrowed. You're very confident for someone so new. I'm very motivated, Serafina corrected. I have everything to prove and nothing to lose. Not quite true. She had everything to lose now. But Victor didn't need to know that. After a long moment, Victor nodded. 90 days. We'll reconvene in July to review your performance. The meeting continued for another hour, covering quarterly projections and expansion plans. Serafina took notes, asked intelligent questions, and felt the dynamic in the room slowly shift. They were taking her seriously now. Not all of them, not completely, but it was a start. When they finally adjourned, Kane's hand found the small of her back. Brilliant, he murmured. You were absolutely brilliant. Victor's going to be a problem, Serafina said quietly. Victor's always a problem, Ryder agreed, but you handled him perfectly. Gave him a measurable challenge instead of asking for blind faith. As the executives filed out, Marcus Reed approached. Up close, Serafina could see the fatigue around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that suggested health issues. That was well played, Ms. Ashford. You've got steel under that pretty exterior. He extended his hand. I'll admit I was skeptical when Kane and Ryder announced the change. But if you can deliver even half what you promised, you'll have my full support. His handshake was firm despite the tremor. Genuine respect in his weathered face. Thank you, Marcus. I hope I can learn from your experience during the transition. After he left, only Victor remained gathering his papers with deliberate slowness. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. A word of advice, Ms. Ashford. This industry isn't kind to Omegas who get above their station. Kane and Ryder might protect you within these walls, but outside you're going to face challenges that numbers and spreadsheets can't solve. There was something in his tone. Not quite a threat, but close. I appreciate the concern, Serafina said carefully, but I didn't come this far by being fragile. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll see. 90 days, Ms. Ashford. Don't waste them. The next 8 weeks passed in a whirlwind of 18-hour days and relentless execution. Serafina threw herself into the work with single-minded determination driven by equal parts ambition and the terror that she'd fail and prove Devon right about her worthlessness. She renegotiated supplier contracts, saving the promised 800,000. Implemented dynamic scheduling across all 12 clubs, cutting labor costs by 1 million. Leased 4 of the 6 vacant properties to corporate tenants, generating immediate rental income. The twins watched her work with a mixture of pride and concern. Evenings they'd find her still at her desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and contracts running on coffee and stubborn refusal to sleep until the day's goals were met. You're going to burn out, Ryder warned one night in late May, physically removing the laptop from her hands. You've already proven yourself, Serafina. You don't have to work yourself to death. I have to hit the 3 million target, Serafina insisted. Victor's waiting for me to fail. I can't give him the satisfaction. Fuck Victor, Kane said bluntly. His opinion doesn't matter. But it did matter, because on some level Serafina knew she wasn't just trying to prove Victor wrong. She was trying to prove Devon wrong, trying to prove her entire former pack wrong, trying to prove to herself that she was more than the weak, defective omega they'd all believed her to be. By mid-June, the numbers were undeniable. 2.8 million in documented savings and new revenue. Close enough to her 3 million promise that even the most skeptical board members had to acknowledge her success. But success brought new attention, uncomfortable attention. The first warning came in the form of an anonymous email to the company's general inbox. Subject line, "Your new VP has secrets." The body of the email was brief. Serafina Ashford was rejected and banished from Moonstone Pack. She walked into Crimson Moon Club as a prostitute. Is this who you want representing your company? Kane deleted it immediately, but 2 days later, another arrived. Then another. Someone was digging into Serafina's past, trying to weaponize her lowest moments against her. "It's Victor," Ryder said grimly, reading the latest message. "Has to be. He's the only one threatened enough by your success to go this route." "Can we prove it?" Serafina asked, trying to ignore the way shame burned through her chest. The emails weren't lies. She had been rejected. She had walked into Crimson Moon believing she was selling herself. "Not yet," Kane admitted. "The emails route through VPN services. Whoever's sending them knows how to cover their tracks." The harassment escalated. Packages began arriving at the office. Printed photos of Serafina from her Moonstone Pack, days her pale appearance circled in red marker, with words like defective and unwanted scrawled across them. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Serafina was alone in her office on a Friday evening in late June when her cell phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Ms. Ashford, this is Special Agent Jennifer Torres with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We need to schedule a meeting. There are some irregularities in Thornridge Enterprises accounts that require your immediate attention." Serafina's blood went cold. "What kind of irregularities?" "That's better discussed in person. Can you come to our Seattle office Monday morning, 9 a.m.? After the agent hung up, Serafina sat frozen at her desk, mind racing. Financial irregularities. The FBI. This wasn't Victor sending nasty emails. This was something far worse. She called Kane immediately. He and Ryder were at the penthouse within 20 minutes, both grim-faced as she explained the call. "It's a setup," Ryder said instantly. "Has to be. We don't do anything illegal on the books you've been managing." "The gray area operations are completely separate," Kane agreed. "Nothing in the clubs or restaurants or properties should trigger FBI interest. Unless someone planted evidence," Serafina said slowly, the pieces clicking together. "The harassment, the emails now, this. Someone's trying to frame me for something. Or frame us and use you as the scapegoat," Kane said, his expression darkening. "You're the new person with access to the accounts. Easy target." Serafina felt sick. "We need to figure out who's doing this fast." "We will," Ryder promised, pulling her into his arms. "We're not going to let anyone destroy what you've built, what we've built together." That night, Kane made a call. Within hours, a team of forensic accountants was combing through every transaction Serafina had touched in the past 8 weeks. By Sunday evening, they had their answer. Someone had cloned Serafina's login credentials, had planted backdated transactions showing $2 million in fraudulent transfers, all apparently approved by her digital signature. The actual transfers had originated from an external IP address, an address that traced back to a home office in Mercer Island, Victor Harlow's home office. "He's been embezzling for months," the lead forensic accountant explained, spreading printouts across the dining table, "using shell companies and offshore accounts. When you started your audit, he knew you'd eventually find the discrepancies, so he tried to frame you first, make it look like you were the one stealing. But he made a mistake," Kane said, studying the documents with cold fury. "He didn't know we'd hire our own team. Didn't know we'd find the real transaction logs." "There's more," the accountant continued. "His phone records show dozens of calls to a number registered to Devin Blackwood. They've been communicating regularly since early May." Serafina's stomach dropped. "Devin's involved. Looks like he fed Victor information about your past, helped craft the harassment campaign. There are text messages discussing how to expose you and reclaim what's mine under PAC law." Ryder's growl was pure alpha fury. "That fucking bastard." "We have everything we need," Kane said quietly, dangerously. "Financial fraud, attempted frame-up, conspiracy. Victor's looking at federal prison. And Devin?" His pewter gaze met Serafina's. "Devin's going to wish he'd never heard your name." Monday morning, Serafina walked into the FBI's Seattle field office, flanked by both her mates and the best criminal defense attorney in Washington state. Special Agent Jennifer Torres met them in a sterile conference room, bank records and transaction logs spread across the table. Ms. Ashford, Torres began, her expression neutral. We've identified $2 million in fraudulent transfers from Thornridge Enterprises accounts over the past 6 weeks, all apparently approved with your digital signature. Can you explain these transactions? Serafina's heart was pounding, but her voice came out steady. I never authorized any of those transfers. Someone cloned my credentials. The IP addresses trace back to your office computer, Torres said. That's going to be difficult to explain. Not when you look at the real logs, Kane said, sliding their forensic team's folder across the table. Someone planted those transactions and backdated them, but they couldn't hide the actual IP origins. The real transfers came from an external location. Victor Harlow's home office in Mercer Island, to be specific. Torres' expression shifted as she opened the folder. For several long minutes, she read in silence, her face growing progressively more grim. This is comprehensive, she finally said. We'll need to verify independently, but if this analysis is accurate, Mr. Harlow is looking at significant federal charges. There's more, Ryder added, producing a second folder. Phone records showing coordination between Harlow and a third party. Devin Blackwood. They've been working together to harass Ms. Ashford and frame her for Harlow's crimes. Torres reviewed the phone logs, the text messages, the email headers. Mr. Blackwood provided information about Ms. Ashford's personal history. He's her former mate, Kane said coldly. Rejected her publicly, then decided he wanted her back. Thought destroying her professionally would give him leverage under PAC law. PAC law doesn't supersede federal law, Torres said. If Mr. Harlow has been embezzling and Mr. Blackwood has been conspiring with him, they're both looking at serious time. She stood. Wait here. I need to brief my supervisor and coordinate with our cybercrimes unit. If your evidence checks out, we'll be executing warrants within the hour. After Torres left, Serafina finally allowed herself to breathe. Is this really happening? Are they actually going to arrest Victor? They are, their attorney confirmed. The evidence is airtight. Harlow's financial crimes alone are enough for 20 years. Add the conspiracy and attempted frame-up, he'll likely die in prison. Good, Serafina said with more venom than she'd ever heard in her own voice. He tried to destroy me, tried to destroy everything we've built. He deserves whatever he gets. Ryder pulled her into his arms. He's done, love. Victor Devon. Anyone else who thought they could hurt you, they're done. 2 hours later, Torres returned with a grim smile. FBI SWAT is en route to Harlow's residence now. Our cyber team verified your forensics independently. Everything checks out. Mr. Harlow will be in federal custody within the hour. And Devin Blackwood, Kane asked, conspiracy charges. We'll coordinate with local authorities for his arrest. Torres paused. For what it's worth, Miss Ashford, I'm sorry you had to go through this. You were clearly targeted because someone saw you as an easy scapegoat. But I'm not, Serafina said quietly. Not anymore. By evening, the arrests were all over the news. Victor Harlow, prominent businessman and board member of Thornridge Enterprises, charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted frame-up. Potential sentence, 25 years to life. Devin Blackwood, former alpha heir of Moonstone PAC, charged as co-conspirator. Bail set at $500,000. Serafina watched the coverage from the penthouse, wrapped in a blanket between her mates, trying to process that it was really over, that the threat had been eliminated, that she was safe. How long have you known, she asked quietly. About Victor, I mean. When did you start suspecting? The first anonymous email, Kane admitted. The timing was too perfect. Right after your first major success. Someone who felt threatened by your competence. We hired the forensic team that weekend, Ryder added. Told them to assume everything about your accounts had been compromised and work backwards. You never doubted me, Serafina realized. Not for a second. Never, they said in unison. Fresh tears burned behind her eyes. Thank you for believing in me, for protecting me, for loving you, Kane finished. Which we do, completely, always. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Serafina was reviewing the security footage from Thornridge Tower when the front desk called up. Ms. Ashford, there's a Devin Blackwood in the lobby. He's asking to see you. Should we call security? Serafina's first instinct was to say yes, to have him thrown out, to never see his face again. But then she thought about it, about how she'd walked out of that rejection ceremony with her head high, about how she'd survived and thrived and become everything he'd said she couldn't be. Devin needed to see what he'd lost, needed to understand the magnitude of his mistake. Let him up, she said, but Kane and Ryder need to be present. 10 minutes later, Devin stood in the penthouse living room looking haggard and desperate. Bail had been posted, but he was looking at serious prison time. His life was over, and he knew it. Serafina, he started, his voice hoarse. I need to explain. No, she interrupted, standing with both her mates flanking her. You don't get to explain. You don't get to make excuses. You rejected me, Devin. Called me worthless in front of 300 witnesses. Told me I was too weak, too defective, too useless to stand beside an alpha. I was wrong. You were, Serafina agreed. But here's what you didn't count on. I survived. I found mates who actually value me. I built a career running a $500 million empire. I proved every single thing you said about me was a lie. Devin's face crumpled. I know, and I'm so sorry. Victor said if I helped him discredit you, if we could just get you away from them, I could invoke pack law, could reclaim you, could fix what I broke. You can't fix it, Serafina said, her voice carrying across the open space. What you broke wasn't our bond, Devin. You broke my trust in myself. Made me believe I was worthless. And when I finally started to believe otherwise, you tried to destroy that too. She stepped forward, holding his gaze. But here's the thing. I'm not the weak Omega you rejected. I'm not the desperate girl who walked into Crimson Moon Club. I'm a VP of a major company. I'm mated to 2 alphas who worship the ground I walk on. I'm carrying their children. Devin's eyes widened. You're pregnant. 10 weeks, Serafina confirmed, her hands settling on her still flat stomach. Twins, a boy and a girl. They're going to grow up knowing they're loved, valued, and capable of anything. Everything you tried to make me believe I wasn't. Serafina, please. You're banned from this building, Kane said, his voice arctic. From any Thornridge property. If you contact Serafina again, we'll file for a restraining order. And when you inevitably go to prison for conspiracy, know that you did this to yourself. Serafina helped us gather evidence against you, Ryder added. Your text messages, your calls, your emails with Victor. All of it. She personally ensured you'd face justice. You wanted to destroy me, Serafina said quietly. Instead, you destroyed yourself. And honestly, I'm grateful. Because your rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. It led me here, to them, to this life. So thank you, Devin, for being exactly the bastard I needed you to be. Devin's face went white. I never wanted it to end like this. Neither did I, Serafina said. I wanted the fairy tale, the loving mate, the happy pack, the simple life. But I got something better. I got mates who chose me, who fought for me, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She nodded toward the door. Now get out, and don't ever come back. After security escorted Devin out, Serafina collapsed into Ryder's arms, shaking with adrenaline and emotion. Is it really over? Is he really gone? He's really gone, Kane confirmed. And in 6 months, when his trial concludes, he'll be in prison. You'll never have to see him again. Good, Serafina whispered, because I meant what I said. Your rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. December in Seattle meant rain and gray skies, and the kind of bone-deep cold that made Serafina grateful for the heated floors in the Thornridge Tower lobby. She stood in front of the bronze plaque being mounted on the wall, one hand resting on her 7-month belly, where their daughter was currently practicing what felt like kickboxing. Thornridge Ashford Omega Resource Center, providing shelter job training and support for rejected Omegas. Because rejection isn't the end, it's a beginning. $10 million, 47 women helped in the first 6 months, all because one desperate Omega had refused to give up. How's she doing? Kane asked, his hand joining hers on her stomach. Restless, Serafine said with a smile, just like her father's. Our son is calm, Ryder protested, his palms settling on the other side where their boy rested peacefully. For now, Kane said dryly. Wait until he's born. Twin alphas are never calm. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled to start in 10 minutes. The press was already gathering outside cameras, ready to document the opening of Seattle's first privately funded Omega Sanctuary. Serafina had personally overseen every detail of the center's design. Private rooms for those who needed solitude. Communal spaces for those who craved connection. A commercial kitchen where rescued Omegas could learn job skills. Medical facilities staffed by trauma-informed professionals. Career counselors who understood the unique challenges faced by rejected wolves. Everything she desperately needed 8 months ago. You ready? Ryder asked gently. Serafina looked at the marble lobby, the gleaming reception desk, the comfortable furniture arranged in welcoming clusters. Through the windows, she could see the media gathering. The board members, who'd once doubted her, now stood ready to celebrate her vision. Marcus Reed had retired peacefully, calling her the finest successor he could have imagined. The company had grown another 20% under her leadership. The board had unanimously extended her contract for 5 years. But more than any professional victory, this moment mattered most. "I'm ready," she said. The ceremony was brief but powerful. Serafina stood at the podium, speaking to the crowd of journalists, board members, rescued Omegas, and supporters. Her voice carried across the space, steady and sure. "8 months ago, I was rejected by the Alpha I thought was my destined mate. I was banished from my pack with nothing but a duffel bag and $400. I spent 3 days sleeping in abandoned buildings, eating from dumpsters, certain I was worthless because someone told me I was." She paused, letting the words sink in. Several of the rescued Omegas in the front row were crying, recognizing their own stories and hers. "I walked into the Crimson Moon Club believing I had to sell my body to survive. Instead, I found mates who recognized my value, who offered me not just protection, but partnership, who believed I could build something meaningful." Her hands settled on her belly. "I'm standing here today as VP of Thornridge Enterprises, as the mate of two extraordinary alphas, as the mother of the twins I'll welcome in 2 months. But most importantly, I'm standing here as proof that rejection doesn't define your worth." It never did. She looked directly at the rescued Omegas. "This center exists because you deserve better than desperation. You deserve safety, support, and the chance to rebuild your lives with dignity. Rejection doesn't mean you're broken. It means someone else was too blind to see your value." The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Afterward, individual Omegas approached her, sharing their stories. A woman who'd been rejected for being barren and had attempted suicide. A teenager whose pack had cast her out for being gay. An older Omega whose mate had died and whose pack had decided she was too old to be useful. Each story was different. Each story was the same. Society had failed them. Their packs had failed them. But they'd survived anyway. "Thank you," one woman whispered through tears. "You gave us hope." "No," Serafina said gently. "You gave yourself hope by surviving. I just provided a safe place to rebuild." As the crowd dispersed, Serafina found herself alone with her mates in the center's meditation garden. Winter roses bloomed against all odds, their beauty persisting despite the cold. "How are you feeling?" Kane asked, settling beside her on the stone bench. "Overwhelmed," Serafina admitted. "Happy, grateful, terrified about becoming a mother in 2 months, all of it at once." "You're going to be an amazing mother," Ryder said, kneeling in front of her to press a kiss to her belly. "Our kids are so damn lucky." "We all are," Kane added. "You walked into our club 8 months ago and changed everything. Changed us. Made us better." Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. Again. Pregnancy hormones made her cry at everything these days. "I love you both so much, even when you make me cry at ribbon-cutting ceremonies." "We love you too," they said in unison. Then Ryder grinned. "Though technically you made yourself cry, we're just being supportive." She laughed through her tears, feeling their son kick in response to the sound. "He's going to have your terrible sense of humor, isn't he?" "Probably," Kane admitted, "but he'll also have your strength, your resilience, your absolute refusal to give up even when everything seems impossible." "And our daughter?" Serafina asked. "She'll have your beauty," Ryder said softly, "your intelligence, your compassion for those who suffer. She'll change the world, just like her mother did." 2 months later, on a snowy February evening, Ashton and Isabella Thornridge entered the world. The boy arrived first, squalling with alpha fury at being disturbed. His sister followed 3 minutes later, quiet and watchful, her pale blue eyes already tracking movement. Serafina held them both, these perfect, tiny humans she and her mates had created, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was what Devon had rejected. This family, this love, this absolute certainty of belonging. She'd never been more grateful for his blindness. "They're perfect." Kane breathed, tears streaming down his face as he held his son. "Just like their mother," Ryder added, cradling their daughter with the kind of reverence usually reserved for divine objects. Serafina looked at her family, at the mates who'd claimed her when she had nothing, at the children who would grow up knowing they were loved unconditionally, at the life she'd built from the ashes of rejection. Devon had been wrong about everything. She wasn't too weak. She wasn't defective. She wasn't worthless. She was exactly enough. Exactly where she was meant to be. Exactly who she was always supposed to become. And that was everything. 5 years later, the Thornridge Ashford Omega Resource Center had expanded to 7 locations across Washington, Oregon, and California. They'd helped over 300 rejected Omegas rebuild their lives. 15 women had started their own businesses. 22 had found new mates. All of them had found safety and dignity. Serafina stood in the original center's lobby, now surrounded by photographs of successful graduates. She was here for the 5th anniversary celebration, though she'd had to take a day off from her role as CEO of Thornridge Enterprises. Kane and Ryder had stepped back to advisory positions 3 years ago, wanting more time with their growing family. Growing because Ashton and Isabella now had a baby brother, 3-year-old Alexander, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's pale blue eyes. "Mama," Isabella called, running across the lobby in a purple dress that matched her eyes. "Look, Miss Sarah said I can help with the new Omega who came today." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Serafina said, catching her daughter up in a hug. "Remember to be gentle. She's probably scared." "I'll tell her what you always tell us," Ashton said, appearing with his father's. "That being rejected doesn't mean you're broken. It means someone else was blind." Serafina's throat tightened. "That's exactly right, baby." That evening, as they drove home to their house on Whidbey Island, Ashton asked the question she'd known was coming. "Mama, why were you rejected? Was there something wrong with you?" Serafina met her son's pewter eyes in the rearview mirror, eyes just like his father's. "Someone thought there was. He thought I was too different, too weak, not valuable enough. He was wrong about all of it. But if he hadn't rejected you, you wouldn't have found Papa Kane and Papa Ryder," Isabella said thoughtfully. "That's true," Serafina agreed. "So it's good he rejected you," Ashton concluded, "because now we get to be a family." Serafina glanced at Kane in the driver's seat, at Ryder beside her, at their 3 children in the back, at the life she'd built from the rubble of her lowest moment. "Yes, baby," she said softly, "it's very good he rejected me, because it led me home."